Inclusion isn't something you ask for at the end of the IEP meeting. Inclusion is something you need to start building from page 1 of the IEP. And this may sound a little like off to you because it's like, I don't know, Charmaine, I've always been told that we don't talk about placement until the end of the IEP. And that's what I used to always say. And actually, it's still true, right? We don't want to talk about placement before we've even described your child. We want to get that richness first. So, although officially they're going to check a box at the end of that IEP, we want you to start building your case for inclusion right at the beginning of the meeting. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So stay tuned because we have lots more coming. Now, if you're a parent that's been advocating for your child to be seen as a general education student first, if you've been advocating for your child to be seen as this wonderful, valuable person, you might have been experiencing probably years of an uphill battle to get your child seen as, yes, they can keep learning. They do have something to offer others. So if this sounds familiar, let me know. You can make a comment. And I want to welcome not only our live viewers, but also people watching on the replay. And we're looking at how to build your case for inclusion, starting on page 1 of your child's IEP. Now, what I see a lot is I see parents with the goal of, if I can get my kid to be included for 80% of the day, that's like the gold standard, then I've won, And so you might be that parent that's like, when we get to the end of the IEP, I want to make sure that they're included for 80% of the time. And you might have seen a past live where I did a whole live about the illusion of inclusion. And I think that 80%, that number, I think can be such an illusion of inclusion. And we'll be talking about why and some examples of that in a minute. I think from the school district's standpoint, they think minutes in the general ed class equals your child is going to have access to general ed, to the general education curriculum. However, we also give some examples of just having a seat in the general ed classroom is another example of that illusion of inclusion. Because time in a seat is not access to being with your peers and learning with your peers. So I have this self-check that I thought would be fun to go through. So say hi if you are here. Kim. Hello from Iowa. And Kim, I owe you an email. Thanks for being here. So pipe in and let us know your thoughts, because it's much better if this is interactive and not just me talking at you. So I'm a believer in asking questions, making comments, putting together aha moments. So what I thought might be interesting is just to do, I don't know, a little self check for yourself. And so I'll ask, there's a series of 6 questions, and it's not like you have to answer in the comments. You can just answer for yourself. So it could be a yes, your answer might be sometimes, your answer might be not yet. So let's walk through these and see the discussion we can have around them also. So the first question is, do you have a good picture of exactly what parts of the day your child is included with their general ed classmates? It could be in the general ed classroom, it could be in other places in the building. But when you think about, yeah, my kid's included at school, what parts of the day are they included for? And I was thinking this morning, and I'd like to do more research, so I really make sure I'm accurate. But when I look, so we're in 2026, right? I have a son who's 37. So he was born in 1988, started school in the 90s. However, I was in college in the 70s. And in the 70s, there were so many parents and disability organizations fighting for our kids' rights to just go through that front door of the school building. Like that was kind of the minimum expectation, is if I could just get my kid in the neighborhood building, if I could just get my kid in this school instead of having to be bused to a separate school or not going to school at all. So back to 70s, that's when we first had the first rendition of IDEA. It was like, let my kid go in the school building. And then I think I don't know, to me, like the 80s, then it was like, boy, it's nice that my kid is in the building. However, his classroom is downstairs next to the boiler room. And really, the only time he gets to be with his peers is at lunch and at recess. And for some parents, that was like, I'll start there. That's good enough, right? I mean, I did my, now you know how old I am. I did my student teaching in, I guess it was 73, 74. And one of the classrooms where I was student teaching, it was a self-contained, segregated classroom for kids. And they didn't even go to lunch and recess with anyone else. I mean, they ate lunch in the classroom. And I'm like looking at the special ed teacher like, don't they go to the lunchroom? And it's like, no, there's too many problems there, so we just eat here. And it's like, oh, the same reason. We just have our own recess time. It's a lot easier that way. And it was like, wow. So I look back and look at the levels of inclusion and how parents have had to fight for it. And then once your kid got included for lunch and recess, the next big step was, could they also go to art, music, and PE with their general ed class? And that was the ask. And then gradually it was like, well, what about science and social studies? I bet there'd be good concepts in there. And, if they watch a video, they know about it, they can talk about it. Yeah, like, what about science and social studies? So, we've spent decades through the 70s, like inching our way along to get our kids recognized as, guess what? They are a general education student first, and that's where they belong. So if any of this sounds familiar, yeah, you're not alone, because this is something that a lot of us have had to deal with, right? So Kim, she said, yes, with my son being in junior high, the block schedule is followed. And that's how minutes are aligned. I know, isn't that interesting? Yeah, I do see that switch for secondary, right? It's like, oh, well, if they're going to have, one period of resource help in junior high, then our periods equal 53 minutes or whatever. So yeah, instead the question, right, is supposed to be based on my child's needs. And also we have a whole way of how we explain our kids' needs, but based on the needs of your child and their goals, how much time do you think it will take for them to make progress on that goal? So yeah, so there's all kinds of system things that can kind of get in the way too, right? Yeah. So let's look at our next question. When you read your child's IEP, does it talk more about what your child can't do or what they can do? So, what do you think? Um, I think so many special ed teachers are still stuck in that mindset of, well, your kid only gets an IEP if they're falling behind, either academically, socially, or whatever. So we have to make a case for your child has these problems, therefore they qualify for IEP services, right? And so that whole present level section can sometimes be so filled with what your child can't do. Like, does this sound familiar? Because yeah, it can be so frustrating, right? So what we want to do, and I won't be able to go into that today, but is look at how to reframe our kids' needs, your child's needs, so that they can actually be not fixed, but they have a need to increase communication skills or to be able to be heard or whatever. But it's like, what are the strengths that we can pull out that they have right now? And maybe it's a common interest, right? And it's a Xbox game that both kids like. Is that a way that we can use their interests to help them communicate more with their classmates? So instead of just leaving it as this deficit that needs to be fixed, I like to reframe the needs. But like I said, that's another question for another day. So let's go on here to our third question. Do you ever get that feeling that the para knows more about your child than your child's classroom teacher? I mean, I hear from a lot of parents, and you may be in this situation too, where, at pickup time, the para comes out and she gives you a great rundown of what happened during the day. But you don't get that kind of detailed information when you talk to the classroom teacher. So to me, that's one of those red flags that it's like, you know, how much is the para doing with your child? Is the classroom teacher relying on that para to re-explain the directions, to model how to do it? And is the classroom teacher kind of, pushing her instructional, strategies off to the para? So all of that can kind of be a tangled mess that you want to be aware of, and to see exactly what, the bottom line there is. And thank you, Kim. She said, I loved how you phrased that as a look at his minutes. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it is hard because, I mean, the system is built, with these time frames, right? Um, and I mean, even in elementary, I think, if your child has a math goal, they go, well, we do math every day for, 60 minutes. So that's how much support we'll say that he needs for math, 60 minutes. Um, so yeah, it's those little nuance things that are in IEPs, and unless your mind is trained to look at that and find that, it can easily be something that you just skip over. So where are we now? Oh yes, we are talking about the para, maybe knowing more about your child. And here we get to that percentage part of the IEP, which is at the end, right? Um, However, does anybody ever explain what that really means? What that really looks like, I guess. So, especially, I think, if the compliance box of your child will be included 40 to 79% of the day, well, that's a huge range, if you ask me. So I think we also need to have discussions about what does this really mean, and if it's only 40%, exactly what is my child doing when they're in the general ed class? Um, so those are things that I think, we just get into this habit of, okay, check off the box, go on to the next thing. But you can like pause and say, let's really look at, describe to me a picture of what that would look like when my child is included for 40 to 79% of the time, right? So another thing to look at is if your child's classroom teacher, if they send home like weekly newsletters or even like book orders, I love book orders. Do you also receive that from the classroom teacher? And that might seem like this minor little thing, like, Charmaine, really, isn't this being picky? And it's not. Because to me, this is a sign, is your child really part of that class, or are they just a visitor? And they're not even on the email list for the teacher to send you a classroom newsletter. I mean, to me, that's a telling sign. I remember one parent talking about, her daughter was so excited about first day of school, and, you're like looking for your class and everything. And the teacher had this wonderful back to school classroom display on her classroom door, and she had listed all the students' names. And so this little girl, she's like, so she's looking, and her name wasn't on the list. So those are those first signs that you're going to need a lot more communication, right, with the staff. Yeah, that's just, so let's see. Angie is here. Hey, Angie. Angie's in Nebraska. She said, in our state, they almost all schools leave off that off the IEP. They say it's optional, but I always ask. So are you talking about their percentage of time, Angie? Yeah, because that really comes from compliance with the U.S. Department of Ed, so they can keep statistics of how many students with which disability are included. Um, huh. So that's interesting. Yeah. Because I work in a lot of states, because you can, right, virtually. And I don't ever think I've seen a state form where it's left off. So that is interesting. Yeah. And I don't think you can ding them for it because, like I said, it's really not a required part of the IEP under IDEA. Huh. Interesting. Well, thanks for sharing that. It's so neat um, to see what happens in different states, you know. And so Kim says it's a fine line where boundaries are with para, teacher, parent. I've had experience with teachers who are okay with parents talking to parents, and then the opposite. Yes, for sure. And that, I think a lot of times that comes up when, there's some, I don't know, like breakdown in communication or lack of trust, and the one of the first things that can go away is the parent being able to talk with you. So the school says, guess what? At pickup time, you're not going to go over and give a rundown of the day. That information will come from the teacher. Well, the problem is if the parent's the one that really is with the child, it's like, I want to get that information from the parent. So, yeah, and that can be something that, you want to make sure as far as homeschool communication gets written in the IEP and also gets defined exactly what that's going to look like. Yeah, but that happens a lot, right? So we are up here to our last question. So, have you ever thought, this sounds good. This sounds pretty good. But I'm not sure it's really working. Because you might have left an IEP meeting thinking, oh my gosh, thank goodness, I finally got a well written IEP for my child. Whew. And it's a celebration at home. And then as the weeks go by, it's like, I don't know. When I look at his homework, it's like not modified at all. He can't do this. When he brings home assignments, it looks like somebody else's handwriting. Or they don't ever talk about other kids in their class. All of these little signs that start like kind of eating away at you. And it's like, what? I thought I had this well-written IEP, and inclusion still isn't happening. So there's so much that it can really be overwhelming for you to try and pick and see. But my philosophy is that we really need to start with that foundations in that present level section. And that can set the tone for the entire IEP. So I want to know if you're interested in knowing more about this, because one of the things I thought about doing was helping parents look at the present level section. How can we word that differently so we're building your case of inclusion? And then when we go to the goals, how do we write strength-based goals that lead to inclusion, right? So I don't know, is this something that you would be interested in where we could walk through your individual child's IEP and look at where we can strengthen it and build your case for inclusion? So at the end of the IEP, if it says your child's included for 80% or more of the time, you know what that looks like. You have trust that that's going to happen. So if that was something that you're like, woo, I would love to have that in 2026, let me know, because I don't want to create something that people don't want. So if you would like something like that, let me know. And I appreciate you being here live or even watching the replay, because I know sometimes it's hard to catch everything we want live. I would love for you to walk away today knowing that your child is so capable, that your child has this wonderful, wonderful, is a wonderful, wonderful being. And they don't always have to be on the receiving end of help. They can be giving to others. And that to me is like one of the worst crimes when our kids are segregated. Is people don't see their value and see what they can offer by being and learning beside their classmates every day. So I am Charmaine Thaner, a parent of an adult son with Down syndrome, a retired teacher and advocate for decades. And my wish is that your child is seen as that capable person and that they are valued at their school. So let's stay in touch. I'll be back again in a couple of weeks. But yeah, stay in touch. Take care. And I should